It was still early morning when the city began to wake up, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. The streets were filled with the soft sound of cars, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted through the air. Inside a quiet penthouse overlooking downtown Chicago, Marcus Ellison stood in front of a large mirror, straightening his tie. Today wasn't just another work day. It was the biggest day of his life. Marcus was the CEO of Ellison Technologies, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in America. After years of struggle, he was finally about to close a historic $4.3 billion international deal that would take his company global. He had worked tirelessly for this moment. Countless late nights, endless flights, and years of rejection before success finally arrived at his door. But Marcus had never let pride replace humility. He knew where he came from, the small neighborhood where his mother used to remind him, "Respect will open more doors than money ever could." He poured himself a cup of coffee and looked out at the skyline. His reflection blended with the sunrise, calm and focused. His assistant, Jordan, called right on time. "Good morning, sir. The flight to Zurich is confirmed." "Your driver is downstairs," Jordan said. Marcus smiled. "Perfect, thank you. Let's make today a good one." He grabbed his black leather briefcase, and the same one he'd carried since his first business pitch, and stepped out of his apartment. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual, as if the day was holding its breath with him. Outside, a sleek black car waited at the curb. The driver greeted him respectfully and opened the door. As they drove through the city, Marcus stared out the window, thinking about how far he'd come. Years ago, people had laughed at the idea of a black man running one of the biggest tech companies in America. He had faced rejection, discrimination, and disbelief, but he never let it define him. Instead, he built his empire one decision, one lesson, and one sleepless night at a time. The driver spoke up softly. "Big day today, sir?" Marcus chuckled. "You could say that. Today decides the future of the company, and maybe mine too." They shared a polite smile. When they arrived at the airport, Marcus stepped out with quiet confidence. He didn't like drawing attention. He wore a simple gray suit, polished shoes, and a calm expression. But anyone who looked closely could tell this was a man who carried purpose in every step. The airport was busy but calm. Business travelers hurried past, pulling sleek suitcases, while families chatted near the check-in counters. Marcus walked straight toward the VIP section, his briefcase in one hand and his passport in the other. Every detail of the trip had been planned perfectly. The flight, the meeting, the presentation, even the champagne waiting in Zurich for the signing ceremony. But as he joined the short line at the first-class counter, something unexpected happened. The staff member behind the desk didn't look up at first. She was busy chatting with her coworker, laughing quietly about something on her phone. When Marcus reached the counter, he greeted her politely. "Good morning," he said, offering his ID. She glanced up briefly, her smile fading into a flat expression. "Yeah, ID," she said without warmth, reaching out her hand lazily. Marcus handed it to her, still calm. "You're flying to Zurich, right?" she asked, flipping through the system without even making eye contact. "Yes, that's correct," he replied kindly. "I believe there's also a seat upgrade confirmed for me under my company account." Her fingers stopped typing for a second, and she sighed. "There's no upgrade listed here," she said dismissively. Marcus opened his phone to show the confirmation email. "If you check under business class priority, you'll find it there," he said politely, keeping his voice steady. But instead of checking, the staff member scoffed. "Sir, I said there's nothing here," she replied, tossing his ID onto the counter. It missed and fell to the floor with a sharp click. A few passengers nearby turned their heads. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough to make the air feel different, heavier. Marcus froze for a second, staring at his ID lying near his shoe. He didn't say anything. Slowly, he bent down, picked it up, and looked at the staff member. Her expression didn't change. She didn't apologize. For Marcus, it wasn't just about the ID, it was about what it meant. A small act of disrespect that carried the weight of something bigger. In that one careless moment, she hadn't seen him as a CEO, or even as a person worthy of basic courtesy. To her, he was just another passenger, one she didn't think mattered. He took a deep breath, forcing a polite smile. "Thank you," he said softly. "Have a good day." Then he turned and walked away, leaving her staring after him in confusion. Around him, people whispered quietly, unsure how to react. One older man nearby muttered, "That was unnecessary," shaking his head. Marcus didn't respond. He walked toward the VIP lounge, his footsteps slow but steady. Inside, he sat down by the window, the city visible in the distance. He looked at his reflection in the glass again, the same reflection that had looked confident an hour ago. But now, behind the calm eyes, there was disappointment, not in himself, but in how easily people forgot the value of respect. He thought about his mother's words again. Respect will open more doors than money ever could. He smiled faintly, realizing how true they still were, and how some people still hadn't learned that simple truth. He reached for his phone, opened his email, and began typing something that would soon change everything. At that moment, he didn't know that this single morning, this small act of arrogance, would lead to the collapse of a $4.3 billion deal and spark a conversation the world wouldn't forget. But deep inside, Marcus already knew one thing. Money could build companies, but respect builds legacies, and he wasn't about to trade his values for either. The airport was busy, alive with the sound of rolling suitcases and boarding announcements echoing through the air. People hurried from one gate to another, coffee cups in hand, eyes glued to flight schedules. To everyone else, it was just another day. But for Marcus Ellison, that moment, standing at the check-in counter, would soon become the turning point of his entire career. He had always believed in professionalism, in keeping calm no matter how others behaved. As a black CEO leading one of the largest tech companies in America, he'd learned that control was his greatest strength. But what happened next would test that strength like never before. The young man behind the counter was new, his badge still shiny, his posture careless. He didn't even look up when Marcus approached again with his boarding pass. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely. "I think there might have been an error with my seat upgrade." The staff member sighed dramatically, snatching the ID from his hand. Yeah, give me a second," he muttered, typing half-heartedly. The line behind Marcus began to grow. The man's impatience was visible in every gesture, the tapping of his fingers, the rolling of his eyes, the dismissive tone. After a few moments, he stopped typing and said flatly, "There's nothing here. I already told you that." Marcus stayed calm. "If you look under the company booking, you'll find it," he said kindly. "It was confirmed by our travel department just an hour ago." But instead of checking, the man frowned. "Sir, I said there's no upgrade. Maybe next time check your email properly before you come up here." His words carried a tone Marcus knew too well. Not just impatience, but judgment. It wasn't the first time someone had assumed he didn't belong in first class or that his success needed proof. Marcus took a slow breath. "Could you please verify with your supervisor?" he asked politely, still holding his ground. That's when it happened. The man picked up Marcus's ID, glanced at it again, and with an irritated flick of his wrist threw it onto the counter. The small card hit the edge, bounced, and landed on the floor. For a moment, time froze. The ID, the one that carried his name, his achievements, his identity, lay face down near his shoes. Around him, the line fell silent. Even the nearby family waiting for a flight stopped talking. Everyone had seen it. Everyone had heard it. Marcus stared at the card for a few seconds. The young staff member realized what he had done, but instead of apologizing, he crossed his arms defensively. "Look, it slipped. Don't make it a big deal," he said coldly. Marcus bent down slowly, picked up his ID, and held it carefully in his hand. His reflection shone faintly from the plastic surface. Calm, collected, but not unshaken. He looked up at the staff member, his voice quiet but firm. "Young man," he said, "respect is free. But when you lose it, it can cost more than you imagine." The words hung in the air like a blade. No shouting, no anger, just truth. The manager at the next counter noticed the tension and hurried over. "Sir, I'm so sorry," she said quickly. "Is there a problem?" Marcus looked at her kindly. "No problem at all," he replied. "Just a moment of truth, that's all." He smiled faintly, then turned away, leaving the staff frozen behind him. He walked toward the VIP lounge, his footsteps echoing softly against the marble floor. The stairs followed him, not because of who he was, but because of how he carried himself. Calm, unbothered, dignified. But inside, his mind was racing. That ID wasn't just a piece of plastic. It represented years of hard work, every deal, every sleepless night, every moment he'd fought to be taken seriously. And just like that, a stranger had tossed it away as if it meant nothing. When Marcus reached the lounge, the receptionist greeted him warmly. "Good morning, Mr. Ellison," she said, smiling. "We're honored to have you again." He smiled back, grateful for the kindness. "Thank you," he said softly. He took a seat by the window, setting his briefcase down beside him. Outside, planes lifted off into the sky one by one, their trails vanishing into the clouds. He watched them quietly, thinking about how fragile respect could be, how easily it could be broken by arrogance, by ignorance, by a moment of carelessness. He thought of his mother again, her voice echoing in his memory. "Don't ever let someone's disrespect shake your grace." He smiled faintly, repeating her words under his breath. Then he reached for his phone and opened his email app. His fingers hovered over the screen for a moment, then he began to type a message to his team. "We may need to reconsider today's signing. I'll explain soon." He didn't send it yet. He just stared at the draft, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. He wasn't angry, but he was reflective. He understood that sometimes the smallest acts reveal the biggest truths. At that moment, Marcus Ellison, the man who had fought his whole life for fairness, decided that respect, not profit, would define his next move. He closed his phone, leaned back in his chair, and whispered softly, "Some deals are worth losing if it means keeping your dignity." Outside, another plane took off, its roar fading into the sky, just like the arrogance he had decided to leave behind forever. The lounge was quiet, filled with soft jazz music and the faint smell of roasted coffee beans. Business travelers sat in leather chairs, speaking softly into their phones. Marcus Ellison sat near the window, his ID resting on the table beside his untouched cup of tea. He wasn't angry anymore, just thoughtful. He had faced disrespect before, but something about that moment at the counter hit differently. Maybe it was the way the staff member had looked at him, not as a CEO, not even as a customer, but as someone unimportant. Marcus had spent years building a company that preached equality, integrity, and respect, yet here he was, reminded that prejudice could still find its way into the smallest corners of life. He leaned back, gazing at the runway outside. Planes were taking off one after another, their wings cutting through the sky like silver arrows. He thought about how every plane carried stories, people chasing dreams, families reuniting, and some just trying to survive another day. And here he was, sitting quietly in a world where even billionaires weren't safe from disrespect. A waiter approached his table gently. "Sir, would you like a refill?" Marcus looked up, smiling faintly. "No, thank you," he said. "I'm fine," but the waiter hesitated. He had recognized Marcus. The magazine covers, the interviews, the articles about his upcoming $4.3 billion merger. "Excuse me," the waiter said softly. "You're Mr. Ellison, right? The CEO of Ellison Technologies?" Marcus nodded, a bit surprised. "Yes, that's me," the waiter smiled warmly. "It's an honor, sir. I've read about your company. You've helped a lot of people get jobs through your community programs." Marcus's expression softened. "Thank you," he said. "That means more than you know." The waiter hesitated again, then added, "If you don't mind me saying, sir, I saw what happened at the check-in desk." Marcus blinked, caught off guard. "I was nearby," the waiter continued. "That wasn't right. You handled it better than most people would have." Marcus smiled gently. "Sometimes silence speaks louder than anger," he said. "People remember how you react more than what you say." The waiter nodded thoughtfully and walked away, leaving Marcus with his thoughts. He picked up his ID again, tracing the edges with his thumb. It was just a small plastic card, but for him, it symbolized something much larger: identity, dignity, and the journey of proving himself again and again in a world that often judged first and listened later. His phone buzzed with a message from Jordan, his assistant. "Everything's ready for Zurich. The board is expecting confirmation that you'll attend the signing today." Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. Then he opened his laptop, the reflection of the screen glowing softly on his face. On one side of the screen was the presentation for the billion-dollar merger. Charts, projections, growth forecasts. On the other side, an email to his partners was still half-written. He started typing again. "Gentlemen, before we sign this deal, I'd like to revisit one question. Not about profits, but about principles. He stopped, his fingers hovering above the keys. He knew this message would send shockwaves through the business world. Walking away from a $4.3 billion deal would make headlines, raise eyebrows, and maybe even cost him investors. But he also knew something else. If he let this go without reflection, he'd be betraying everything his company stood for. As he sat there in silence, an older man across the lounge caught his eye. The man, dressed in a pilot's uniform, smiled kindly and said, "Don't let one bad apple ruin your day, son." Marcus chuckled softly. "I'm not upset," he replied. "I'm just thinking about what kind of world we'd have if everyone learned to see people before judging them." The pilot nodded. "The world needs more men who think like that." Marcus returned the smile, then looked out the window again. The next plane was preparing for takeoff, its engines humming like distant thunder. For a brief moment, he imagined the sound fading behind him as he left all negativity in the past. He finally picked up his phone and sent a short text to his team. "We'll pause the deal. I'll explain soon." He didn't add anything else. He didn't need to. Somewhere deep inside, he felt a strange peace, the kind that comes not from success but from doing what feels right. He had learned long ago that dignity can't be bought, and respect can't be forced. He finished his tea quietly, closed his laptop, and stood up. As he walked toward his gate, people turned to look at him, some recognizing him, others simply drawn to his calm confidence. He didn't rush. He didn't glare back at the check-in counter. He just moved forward, head high, shoulders straight, and heart steady. He had made his decision because sometimes the most powerful way to respond to disrespect isn't with revenge, and it's with restraint. The kind of quiet strength that makes the world stop and think, even if it doesn't want to. Marcus sat in his seat by the gate, his eyes fixed on the runway but his mind far away. The lounge's calm music had faded into the background, replaced by the low hum of jet engines and the faint chatter of travelers, who had no idea that a $4.3 billion deal hung in the balance nearby. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Jordan. "Sir, Zurich team just confirmed the press conference for tonight. Should I tell them you're en route?" Marcus didn't reply. His thumb hovered over the screen, but his thoughts drifted back to the airport counter. The careless flick of the wrist, the sound of his ID hitting the floor, and the quiet stares of people who had seen it happen but said nothing. He had experienced subtle prejudice before, but this moment carried a different weight. Maybe it was because he had worked too hard, come too far, and built too much to still be treated like a nobody. Maybe it was because he knew he couldn't let it slide this time. He took a slow breath and closed his eyes for a moment. The image of his mother appeared in his memory, sitting at their old kitchen table telling him, "Marcus, don't ever confuse silence with weakness. Sometimes silence is power, the kind that shakes the world." He opened his eyes again, calm but resolute. He pulled out his laptop and opened the proposal file. The screen displayed the logos of the two companies, Ellison Technologies and Helix Global. Together they were supposed to create the biggest merger in tech history, but Marcus had always said that Ellison Technologies stood for integrity first. That was the company's motto, written in bold letters on the very first page of every presentation. Now he wondered, if he signed this deal, knowing that the partner company's staff treated people like him with disrespect, was he staying true to that motto? Or was he just chasing profit while pretending to lead with values? He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Around him, flight announcements echoed through the speakers. Final call for Flight 237 to Zurich. That was his flight. But he didn't move. A businesswoman seated nearby recognized him and whispered to her companion, "That's Marcus Ellison. He's supposed to be signing that big deal today." Marcus noticed but didn't respond. He was lost in thought, weighing the cost of walking away. It wasn't just money. It was jobs, partnerships, the trust of investors. People had worked for years toward this moment. Could he risk all of that to make a point? Then he thought of something his mentor once told him. If you let disrespect slide once, it'll come back stronger the next time. That was enough. He opened his email and began typing a new message to his board. "Team, we're postponing the Zurich signing. I need to reassess our partnership with Helix. Today, I witnessed something that made me question whether their values align with ours. We build technology, but we also build trust. And if that trust is compromised, so is the deal." He paused, read it again, then hit send. The email left his screen and flew into cyberspace, carrying with it the weight of principle over profit. A few minutes later, his phone started vibrating nonstop. Jordan called. "Sir, what's happening?" "The Zurich board is panicking." "Did something go wrong?" Marcus answered calmly. "Something went right, Jordan. We're not doing business with people who don't respect others. If they treat their partners the way that staff treated me, imagine how they'll treat our employees." Jordan was silent for a moment, then sighed softly. "Understood, sir. You've always said respect isn't negotiable." "That's right," Marcus replied, his tone firm but peaceful. "Deals come and go, but dignity doesn't expire." He ended the call and placed the phone on the table. For a long while he just sat there, letting the reality of his decision sink in. A few passengers glanced at him, unaware that the calm man sitting quietly by the window had just canceled one of the biggest deals in the industry. Not because of numbers, but because of principles. As his flight took off without him, Marcus watched the plane disappear into the sky. He smiled faintly, not with regret but with relief. Sometimes walking away was the loudest statement a person could make. In another part of the world, the executives at Helix Global were preparing for his arrival, unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. Within a few hours, the media would catch wind of the canceled deal. Questions would be asked, statements would be demanded, and that small act at the airport would become the spark for a much bigger fire. But for now, Marcus Ellison sat in quiet peace, sipping his cold tea, thinking not about the billions he had just walked away from, but about the message he was sending, a message the world desperately needed to hear. Respect is not a courtesy. It's a responsibility. And for the first time that morning, Marcus felt lighter because even though he'd lost a deal, he'd kept his soul. And that was a trade he would make every single time. The next morning, the world woke up to headlines that nobody expected. Black CEO cancels $4.3 billion deal after airport disrespect. The story spread like wildfire across business networks, news channels, and social media feeds. At first, people thought it was just another online rumor, but soon major outlets confirmed it. Marcus Ellison, one of the most respected CEOs in the country, had walked away from the biggest merger in his company's history. What shocked everyone wasn't just that he canceled it, but why. Within hours, the short video clip taken by a bystander at the airport went viral. The clip showed the moment when the airport employee tossed Marcus's ID onto the floor, followed by Marcus picking it up calmly, saying, "Respect costs nothing, but it can change everything." That one sentence became the heartbeat of a movement. People began sharing it with captions, like, "This is what leadership looks like," and "Power isn't loud and it's calm." Others opened up about their own experiences of being disrespected, ignored, or judged based on appearance. Hashtags like "Yar Respect First," Marcus Ellison, and "Dignity Over Deals" trended worldwide. Meanwhile, Marcus stayed quiet. He didn't give interviews, didn't post statements. He believed the truth didn't need shouting. It just needed to be lived. But behind closed doors, chaos was unfolding. At Helix Global, the partner company, executives were in panic mode. Their phones rang nonstop. Investors demanding answers, journalists waiting outside their offices, employees whispering nervously in hallways. The CEO of Helix, David Langford, tried to reach Marcus directly, but every call went unanswered. One leaked email from Helix's internal chain showed David writing, "Find out what happened at that airport. One person's arrogance may have just cost us everything," and it had. By noon, the airport itself released a statement apologizing for the incident, calling it a regrettable interaction that does not reflect our values. But it was too late. The world had already chosen its side, and it stood firmly with Marcus Ellison. Back in Chicago, Marcus sat quietly in his office, away from the noise. Through his window, the city skyline shimmered in the late afternoon light. Jordan, his assistant, walked in holding a tablet full of notifications. "Sir, CNN, Forbes, and BBC are all requesting interviews. They want to hear your side." Marcus smiled faintly. "There's no side," he said. "Just a truth. Respect matters." Jordan nodded but looked hesitant. "You do realize, sir, people are calling you a hero. Some even say you started a new kind of corporate revolution." Marcus chuckled softly. "A revolution?" "No, Jordan. I didn't start anything new. I just reminded people of something old, something we've all forgotten. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes thoughtful. Every contract, every handshake, every deal, they all start with respect. If that's missing, everything else falls apart. As they spoke, the world outside buzzed louder. News anchors discussed him, motivational speakers quoted him, and universities began using his decision as a case study in ethics and leadership. But not everyone was impressed. Some business analysts criticized his move, calling it emotional, saying he had risked the livelihoods of his employees. Yet one of his senior managers defended him on live television, saying, "Mr. Ellison didn't lose $4.3 billion. He invested in something far more valuable, integrity." That line went viral too. Days later, Marcus received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from the very airport staff member who had disrespected him. The man had been suspended and after days of reflection had found the courage to write. The letter read, "Mr. Ellison, I watched the video of myself, and I'm ashamed. I realize now how my arrogance hurt more than just one person. I lost my job, but I gained perspective. Thank you for not shouting at me. Your silence taught me more than my mistakes ever did." Marcus read the letter twice, folded it neatly, and placed it in his drawer. He didn't tell anyone about it. For him, it wasn't about revenge. It was about redemption. That night, he finally turned on the television. A news anchor was saying, "Some people measure success in dollars, but Marcus Ellison reminded the world that true success is measured in dignity." Marcus smiled quietly. The world could keep its opinions, good or bad. He didn't cancel the deal for fame or headlines. He did it because it was right, and somewhere deep inside he knew this was only the beginning. The story had started with one act of disrespect, but now, it had grown into a global reminder that leadership without respect isn't leadership at all. As he looked out the window at the glowing city below, Marcus whispered to himself, maybe losing $4 billion was the price of teaching the world one simple truth, that humanity is worth more than any deal. A week had passed since the story broke, but its echo refused to fade. News anchors still mentioned Marcus Ellison's name every morning, and his quote, "Respect costs nothing, but it can change everything," had been shared millions of times across the world. People began printing it on posters, t-shirts, even office walls. Schools discussed it in assemblies. CEOs quoted it in meetings. But for Marcus, all of that noise didn't matter. What mattered was that people were finally thinking about respect, not as a polite habit, but as a moral standard. Inside his Chicago office, the usual energy of his company felt different. Employees worked with a new sense of pride, walking taller, smiling more. They didn't just work for a company anymore, they worked with a man who stood for something real. Jordan entered the room with a soft knock. "Sir," he said, "there's something you should see." He handed Marcus a tablet. On the screen was a short video, a clip recorded by a young woman at an airport in Atlanta. She had been watching a flight attendant speak rudely to an elderly passenger, and instead of ignoring it, she stepped in calmly and said, "Please remember, respect costs nothing, but it can change everything." The video had already gone viral with the caption, "Marcus Ellison's message lives on." Marcus chuckled softly and shook his head. "It's strange, Jordan," he said. "I never meant for this to become a movement." Jordan smiled. "That's how real change starts, sir. You didn't plan it, you lived it." For a moment, Marcus sat in silence looking at the city skyline outside his window. Then his phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Mr. Ellison, this is David Langford from Helix Global. I need to meet with you, and privately, please. I owe you an apology." Marcus stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Tomorrow. My office. Noon." The next day, David Langford, the man who once sat across the negotiation table with pride and power, entered Marcus's office with humility in his eyes. He wasn't wearing his usual confidence. Instead, he looked like a man who had been forced to look in the mirror for the first time. "Marcus," David began, his voice low, "I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not just for what happened, but for what it revealed. That employee at the airport worked under a branch we sponsor. His behavior was unacceptable. And it made me realize how blind I've been to the culture we've allowed to grow." Marcus listened quietly, his face calm. Sometimes, he said softly, you have to lose something big to learn something important. David nodded. You're right. That deal we lost and it hurt us badly. Investors pulled back, stocks dropped. But honestly, I think it needed to happen. It woke us up. We've started mandatory respect and diversity training for every branch, and we'd like to name it the Ellison Code, if you'll allow it. Marcus raised an eyebrow, surprised. The Ellison Code? Yes, David continued. A reminder that leadership isn't just about profit. It's about how you treat people, from the boardroom to the check-in desk. For the first time since that day, Marcus felt something unexpected. Peace. He extended his hand. Then make sure it's not just a policy, he said. Make it a promise. David shook his hand firmly. It will be. After he left, Marcus sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The world around him was changing, not because of force, but because of influence. Quiet influence, the kind that grows from authenticity. Later that evening, as he drove home, his phone buzzed again. It was an email, this time from the airport employee who had thrown his ID. Marcus hesitated before opening it. Mr. Ellison, I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I've started volunteering at a community center. We teach young people how to communicate with empathy. You were right. Respect can change everything. You changed me. Marcus smiled faintly, looking out at the glowing skyline. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. That night, he stood by his apartment window, watching the city lights flicker like tiny stars. The same city that had once doubted him was now echoing his message. From small restaurants to corporate offices, people were talking about respect. And in that quiet moment, Marcus realized something powerful. He hadn't just canceled a deal. He had started a dialogue, one that reached beyond race, status, or wealth. He whispered softly, almost to himself. Sometimes the loudest revolution begins with the quietest act. Outside, the wind carried that thought through the night. Gentle, invisible, unstoppable. Months passed, but the story of Marcus Ellison didn't fade. It evolved. What had started as a moment of humiliation had become a worldwide lesson. Universities began teaching his story in business ethics classes. Leaders quoted his words during conferences. Even children who had never met him repeated the phrase their teachers taught them. Respect costs nothing, but it can change everything. Marcus never bragged about it. He never wrote a book or gave motivational speeches. He simply continued living by the same principles he always had: quiet strength, fairness, and humility. But everywhere he went, people recognized him. Some shook his hand with gratitude. Others just smiled as if silently saying, "Thank you for reminding us how to be human." One chilly autumn morning, Marcus received an invitation to speak at a youth leadership summit. He almost declined. He didn't like attention. But something in the handwritten note caught his eye. It said, "Your story changed how I see myself. I used to work in customer service and I never realized how much my words could hurt people. Now I train others to speak with kindness. Please come share your story with us." It was signed by Samuel Green, the same airport staff member who had thrown his ID on the floor. Marcus stared at the name for a long time. He hadn't heard it before, but he knew immediately who it was. A soft smile spread across his face. He closed the invitation and whispered, "Life really does come full circle." 2 weeks later, Marcus stood backstage at the youth summit. Hundreds of young people filled the hall, waiting eagerly. On the big screen behind him, his name appeared in bold letters. Marcus Ellison, Integrity in Action. When he stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted into applause. He wasn't used to that kind of welcome. It felt strange but beautiful. He raised a hand, smiling gently, and waited for the room to quiet down. "Good morning," he began softly. "I'm not here as a billionaire. I'm here as a man who was reminded that respect isn't given, it's practiced." The audience leaned in, silent. His voice was calm but full of meaning. "A few months ago, I went through something small. So small it could have been forgotten in a day. But that small moment revealed something big. It showed how easily we forget the weight our actions carry. It taught me that power isn't about how much money you make, but how you make others feel." He paused for a moment, then continued, "The world doesn't need louder leaders. It needs kinder ones." The audience broke into quiet applause. Some people even wiped tears from their eyes. But Marcus wasn't finished yet. "I met someone once who disrespected me," he said, glancing toward the side of the stage. And I want you to meet him too, because his story matters just as much as mine. From the side, a young man walked onto the stage, nervous, humble, but confident. It was Samuel. He looked at Marcus with genuine gratitude and extended his hand. Marcus shook it firmly, smiling. Samuel turned to the audience. "I was the man who threw his ID," he said, his voice trembling. "And I'll never forget that moment. I lost my job, but I found my purpose. That day he taught me something no training ever could, that every person you meet deserves dignity." The crowd stood in stunned silence. Then came a standing ovation, loud, sincere, and emotional. Marcus placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder and said, "Forgiveness is just another form of respect." We both learned something that day. When the applause finally faded, Marcus looked out at the crowd, hundreds of young faces glowing with inspiration, and felt a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. He had spent years chasing success, but this felt like something greater. After the event, as he walked outside into the crisp air, he noticed a group of students gathered near the exit. One of them, a young girl holding a notebook, ran up to him. "Mr. Ellison," she said breathlessly, "I want to start my own company one day, one that treats everyone equally. Can I call it the Respect Project?" Marcus laughed softly, his heart full. "You don't need my permission for that," he said. "Just promise me one thing, that you'll mean every word of it." She nodded eagerly. "I promise." As Marcus walked to his car, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sound of applause still echoing from the hall. He looked up at the bright blue sky and smiled. He realized that sometimes, greatness isn't measured by what you build, but by what you inspire others to build after you. That day, he didn't feel like the CEO of a billion-dollar company. He felt like something far more meaningful, a reminder that even in a noisy world, kindness still speaks the loudest,